Shalom, how you doing? My name is Ruben. I want to welcome you again to the website. If you happen to access this video through YouTube, I know I make this at the beginning of every video, then you might not be at the website, so I'd encourage you to go there. It's the Remnants of Israel, 4 words, the Remnants, R-E-M-N-A-N-T, of Israel.org, O-R-G. There's a lot of interesting articles and videos on there. There's a lot of things that Christians have never even heard of before. I know that may sound a little outlandish to some people, but I guarantee you that's the truth. There's a number of subjects talked about that most people have never heard of in Christianity, and some in Judaism, such as we're going to be talking about today. So let me stop here and get into the conversation. I don't want to scare you away by saying something outrightly and have you say that's crazy, such as I did when somebody told me this 30-some years ago. I said that's the craziest thing I ever heard, what I'm about to tell you. So let me kind of set the stage here a little bit before I make a statement like that. If I was to say to you that there was no such thing as a letter J in any language on the face of the earth until the 16th century, it's like around 1520, it's the first time the letter J that anybody knows of came into existence. It was the first time it was ever used, the first time it came into existence. That's 1,500 years roughly after the death and resurrection of the Messiah. If there wasn't a letter J in any language on the face of the planet, let the plane go by here. If there wasn't a letter J in any language on the face of the earth until the 16th century, 1520, then what was the Messiah called? Could he have been possibly called Jesus if there was no letter J? And of course the answer is no. That's not possible. If there wasn't a J, then of course the name Jesus didn't exist. And there wasn't a J. It's a very easy thing to verify. Get any good dictionary, encyclopedia, look under the letter J, and you'll see when that letter first came into existence. Now that may sound like a minor point, there was no letter J, but if there wasn't a letter J, then there couldn't have been a name Jesus. So what was the name? You may be surprised to learn that in the King James 1611 Bible, the name Jesus does not appear in there one single time. Not one time does the name Jesus appear in the 1611 King James Bible. I'm not talking about the 23rd, 24th editions that people have today that think they have the 1611, which they don't, of course. But in the original 1611, the name Jesus is not in there one single time. You can prove that very easily. Everything I say, I would like for you to verify. Of course, I don't expect anybody to take my word for it, but verify everything I'm going to say. All you have to do is go to a Christian bookstore, go online, go on Amazon. You could probably look in the beginning of the pages there or something on Amazon when you order the 1611, the original 1611 King James. Like I said, the name Jesus is not in there, not one time. The word that is in there is the Greek word, Iesus. 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 You can hear the word Zeus in there, S-O-U-S. It's I-E-S-O-U-S. That's the word that's in the Greek. And that's the word that they used to represent the Messiah's name. Was the Messiah a Greek? Of course not. Did he speak Greek? Possibly. When the angel came to Mary and said in Matthew 1:21, "You shall have a son, he shall save his people from their sins, and his name shall be called," did the angel give Mary a Greek name, Iesus? Did she say his name shall be called Iesus? The Messiah was a Hebrew, Mary was a Hebrew, all the people at that time, of course, spoke Hebrew. There was a misconception in the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. Years ago I read this in there, but there's a note in there at the beginning of it. It says the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls put to rest forever the idea that the language, a predominant language in Judea at that time in Israel, was Greek. It absolutely was not. It was Hebrew. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, they were written in Hebrew. Some of them were, much fewer were written in Aramaic, and almost a very slight amount were found in Greek. Hebrew was the predominant language at that time. I'm going to go through and I'm going to read a couple passages off just to verify that point, so you can see that what I'm saying is absolutely true. Because I've met people in the past that say the Messiah and those around him spoke Greek. Again, I'm not saying that he didn't know the language Greek. I'm saying that's not the language that he was brought up in. It's not the language that he used in his everyday conversation, which will become evident as we go through these, as I go through these passages, bringing that point out. So we're going to talk about the Messiah's name. If there was no letter J, and if he wasn't a Greek and he wasn't called Iesus, then what is his name? His name, in Amos chapter 3, verse 7, Amos chapter 3, verse 7, it says, the Almighty does nothing except he reveals it through his prophets. Did he reveal the name of the Messiah through his prophets? Absolutely he did. Absolutely. And we're going to take a look at that in a moment. So we're going to take a look at what the Messiah's name was prophesied to be, which I don't think anybody listening would disagree with. You're going to all agree with this. But what you're going to disagree with is the fact that the name Jesus isn't a legitimate name. That we'll talk about more I'll talk about more, not at length, but I'll talk about it more. Because like I said, it's something you can verify to yourself very easily, very easily. Check the letter J, see that it didn't exist, ask yourself, if there was no J, what was he called? In the Greek, it was called Iesus. In the King James 1611, they have his name there as Iesus. He was not called Iesus. So hopefully I set the stage. Let me go back and explain some of what I just said here. Names, proper nouns, including names, are transliterated. They're not translated, they're transliterated. What transliterated means is they keep the same pronunciation when you bring them into another language. Like the Eiffel Tower. How would you say Eiffel Tower in French? Eiffel Tower. Vladimir Putin, who's been in the news, he's up here in Syria right now, maybe 150 miles from where we're sitting. He's setting the stage for the end times over here, I believe. Gog and Magog, that's China and Russia. Not to get off on that. But Vladimir Putin, how would you say Vladimir Putin in Russia? Russian. You'd say Vladimir Putin. How would you say Toyota, the car manufacturer Toyota? How would you say his name in Japanese? His name, we say Toyota in English, how would we say in Japanese the word? We'd say Toyota. If my name, Ruben, if I went to any country on the planet, or you went to any country on the planet, does your name change? If you went to Russia or China or Japan or came to Israel, would you say my name is now, your name remains the same. Proper nouns do not change from language to language. That's called transliteration. They're transliterated. They're brought into the other language, keeping the pronunciation as close as possible. Of course, pronunciations change because of, like I mentioned in German, I didn't mention, but in Germany, for instance, a true German couldn't pronounce the W. So instead of saying Volkswagen, like we would say in America, they would say Volkswagen. They pronounce the W as a V. So that's the best they can do. Is that a proper transliteration for somebody who speaks German? Yes, because that's their dialect, that's their accent. They can't say Volkswagen, they say Volkswagen. So what I'm saying is names may change because of dialects or accents, but a transliterated proper noun, which includes names, they're brought into a language keeping the pronunciation as close as possible. You know, and alphabets at times might change as well. Every country in the world doesn't have 26 letters in their alphabet like the English-speaking people do. And in Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet lines up pretty closely, very closely with the the English alphabet. But alphabets may change. Some alphabets don't have letters that sound, they don't have a sound that an English letter might have in the English alphabet. They might not have that sound in their alphabet. And I can't think of any offhand. But so alphabets, because of alphabets being different, every language not having the same alphabet, because of dialects, because of accents. For those reasons, names might sound differently, but they're always transliterated. They're always brought into the language, keeping the pronunciation as close to the original as possible. So again, if the Messiah was given a Hebrew name, which I don't think anybody would disagree with, was he called Iesus? If a Hebrew-speaking person went to Greek and they were talking to the Greek people about the Messiah, like Paul often did, he would speak Greek to them, but when it came to the name of the Almighty, or the name of Israel, or any proper noun, would he say the Almighty's name? Would he say the Hebrew name that he was given at his birth? Or would Paul now change his name to Iesus? Iesus. Of course he wouldn't. It would be the same. Names are not translated, they're transliterated. Translated, of course, we all know what that means, to translate the word. For instance, Yahshua, the name Yahshua, it means Yah is salvation. Daniel, the name Daniel. All these names have, if you translate them, Daniel means El is my judge. Daniel, El is my judge. El being the word that's translated God in most Bibles. Michael means one who is like El. So the name translated, Michael translated, means one who is like El, or again, the word El would be translated God in your Bible. So Michael means one who is like El. We don't say Michael, if you know somebody named Michael, which I happen to know, and I think he's going to be watching this video, we don't say one who is like El, we say Michael. We transliterate his name. We don't translate his name, we transliterate it. But the word translated means one who is like El, or what you would say is one who is like, quote, God. So that's names are translated. So they're translated and they're transliterated. Hopefully I wasn't talking too fast and I made that clear. So keep that in mind as we go through this talk here. So the Messiah was given a Hebrew name. He wasn't given a Greek name. He was given a Hebrew name. There's more I can say about that, but I don't feel there's a need to. I'm confident that most people are going to agree with that. So turn in your Bible to Proverbs chapter 30, verse 4. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 4. I read this passage in talking about the Heavenly Father's name, which is on the website, the Heavenly Father's name, part 1 and 2. You might want to take a look at it if you haven't read it. But Proverbs chapter 30, verse 4, and this is what it says. It says, "Who has ascended into heaven and descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fist, and who has wrapped the waters in his garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name? Surely you know it." And again, I want to make the point like I made in the talk about the Heavenly Father's name. The writer of Proverbs there, Solomon, says, of course you know it. Of course you know the Heavenly Father's name, the one who did this, and his son's name. You know it. But the sad truth is most people today don't know it. The Heavenly Father's name, as I mentioned, he put in his book almost 7,000 times. And yet most people on the planet today don't know what it is. Wow, it's just so incredible, but it's true. If there's an adversary, I'm being facetious in saying that, of course there's an adversary. And if the name of the Heavenly Father was so important, and if the name of the Messiah was so important, I think one of his goals would be to keep people from recognizing the name of the Messiah that we're going to talk about today and the name of the Heavenly Father. And he's accomplished that task. Let's talk about the Messiah's name, and I'd really encourage you to go back and look at the videos on the Heavenly Father's name, and I believe I have an article there too. Turn to Acts chapter 4, if you would. Acts chapter 4. Again, there's a bunch of verses that I want to talk about, but I'm thinking I'd be probably taking up time and it's unnecessary because we all realize the importance of the Messiah's name. Even for somebody that doesn't believe in the Messiah that I happen to believe in, or you happen to believe in, they would still, in Judaism for instance, they would still recognize the importance of the name. There's no question that's a very important thing, but just how important is it that we use the proper pronunciation, that we use the proper name, not the proper pronunciation, the proper name. In Acts chapter 4, verse 12, and this is what Peter says there in Acts chapter 4, verse 12. It says, "And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name given among men by which we must be saved." No other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. There's no other name, Peter says, by which we must be saved. Was that name that Peter was talking about Jesus or Jesus? Well, again, the name Jesus didn't even exist. That's not even in the conversation because there was no such name as the name Jesus at that time. It wouldn't exist for another 1,500 years when the letter J first came into use. So the Greek name at that time was Jesus. And yes, it did exist at that time. But was the Messiah given a Greek name, Jesus, or was he given a Hebrew name? He was given a Hebrew name, of course. So is the name important? According to the Apostle Peter, he says there's no other name given among men by which you must be saved. I don't want to get off on a different subject here, but it amazes me. I tell you, when the Almighty got a hold of my life, and I would read verses like, "Unless you lose your life, you'll never see life," I could not have possibly taken that any more seriously than I did. It meant I had to die to myself and allow the Messiah to live his life in me. I believe that. When Peter says here, there's no name given among men by which we must be saved, I believe that. I think there isn't any other name. If you want to substitute the Messiah's name for another name, you're making a huge mistake. But the adversary accomplished that task at least 400 years ago. After the King James Bible was written is when the name Jesus first came into existence, the original 1611 King James Bible. So is it important? I didn't mean to pause there, but it just amazes me sometimes how you could read something to somebody from the Bible And instead of having the importance that it should have on them, or the impact on them that it should have, it doesn't affect them. I don't understand that. Is it important we know the Messiah's name? Yes, it's important. Could the name have been Jesus? Absolutely not, it's not Jesus. Then what is it? Let's take a look at what it is. I mentioned in Amos chapter 13, there's nothing that the Almighty does unless he prophesies it through his prophets. And that's absolutely true. And he did prophesy the name. And we're going to take a look at that in a moment. Before I do, turn to Micah chapter 4. I want to make a point here. I'm smiling because I'm going to have to explain this point. I don't want to just give you my opinion. I want to tell you the facts as well. My opinion, I believe, are the facts, but I want to tell you the other side of the story more, so to speak. Micah chapter 4 and verse 5. I'm going to start in verse 2. Micah chapter 4, verse 2. It says, "Many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go to the mountain of Yahweh, and to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law." This is talking about future, of course. It says, "Even the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem." We're sitting in Jerusalem right now. I'm looking at the walls of the old city over here. We're sitting about maybe a 15-minute walk to the Jaffa Gate. In verse 3, "And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for the mighty, distant nations. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Each of them will sit under his vine and each under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid. For the mouth of Yahweh of hosts has spoken." In verse 5, this is what I wanted to point out. It says, "Though all the peoples walk, each in the name of his Elohim, or his God, for us, we will walk in the name of Yahweh, our Elohim, forever and ever." So he says there, Micah says that all the nations walk in the name of their gods, but we, Yahweh's people, will walk in the name of our Elohim forever and ever. Did the nations walk in the name of their gods? All the time. They still do to this day. Turn, if you would, to Acts chapter 4. I'm going to give you a prominent example in the Bible here of what I'm talking about. Acts chapter 14. I'm sorry, not 4. Acts 14. Acts 14, I'm going to begin in verse 8. I think this is an incredible point here. It says at verse 8, it says, "At Lystra, a man was sitting who had no strength in his feet, lame from his mother's womb, had never walked. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke, and when he had fixed his gaze on him, and seen that he had the faith to be made well, and with a loud voice, Paul said, 'Stand up on your feet.' And he leaped up and began to walk. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in the Lycaonian language, 'The gods have become like men, and having come down to us.' And they began calling Barnabas Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. They began calling Barnabas because he obviously was the one in authority here, and Paul was doing the speaking, because Paul had the gift of tongues. I believe Paul was translating here for Barnabas. So they began to call Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes. Well, Zeus was obviously that was the name of their god, Zeus. Zeus was such a prominent pagan Elohim. Of course, he was not a real person. I've met people in the past that think there was actually a person that existed named Zeus, and there may be, but as far as the mythological god, Zeus, no, he never existed. But anyway, they began calling Barnabas Zeus after the name of their god. Let me comment about Zeus a little bit. One of the 7 wonders of the world was a 40-foot statue of Zeus. You might want to check that out. The 7 wonders of the world. I think there's the Colossus at Rome. There's a garden, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, Diana at Ephesus. But among the 7 wonders of the world, one of them was a 40-foot statue of Zeus. It was made back around 400 BC, before the Messiah. And it was destroyed 400 years after the Messiah, around 400 AD. This thing existed for roughly a total of 800 years. And it was so venerated 400 years after, in AD, that the emperor at that time, whose name I can't remember, he had it destroyed. He had it destroyed because it was people were reverencing the statue of Zeus more than they were the emperor. And the emperor didn't like that idea. So what I'm saying is Zeus was venerated as the god among the pagans for at least 800 years. The Olympian Games, the Olympics, the Olympics, they were held in honor of Zeus. They were held in honor of Zeus. When the Olympics came to town, in Athens they were held at that time, but when the Olympics occurred, wars were stopped, people stopped fighting each other so they can compete in the Olympian Games. It's a very pagan concept, the Olympics, of course, but it was in honor of Zeus. Zeus was a very prominent god, mythological god, of course, he was a pagan Elohim, pagan god, but I mean, he's a very prominent one. You know, in the Hebrew language, you know, we put the name of the Almighty, his name is Yahweh, and a shortened form of that is Yah, or Yahu, Yah, but that's Y-A-H-W-E-H, Yahweh, a shortened form is Y-A-H, and his name is put at the end of many Hebrew names, Zechariah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Obadiah. So that's the Yah at the end of it is the Almighty's name. And what they're all saying is Isaiah, it means salvation of Yah. You know, Jeremiah, Obadiah. Obadiah means a servant of Yah. But the name of the Elohim of Israel is put at the end of a lot of Hebrew names. And the same is true in the Greek language. They put the name of their Elohim, their God, at the end of a lot of names. And like I mentioned here, and you can verify it, absolutely verify it, the Messiah given the name Zeus. We can hear the name Zeus there. And again, Zeus was very prominent at that time. We just read in Acts 14 here, where the pagans immediately start calling Barnabas by the name of their god, Zeus. That's what they wanted to call him. They said the gods have become like men. That's exactly what Christianity does today. Well, they started it 2,000 years ago, and people today in ignorance, they continue that. The gods have become like men. Is there such a term in the Bible as the God-man? It doesn't exist. There's many Christians that probably would say, of course it is, because you've heard it so many times, but the fact is it doesn't exist. Is there a verse in the Bible that says Trinity? Again, no such word exists in the Bible. Is there the second person of, or the third person, or first person of anything ever mentioned in the Bible? And again, the answer is no. But the God-man is never mentioned in the Bible, except if you want to say Acts 14, where it says the pagans now, keep that in mind, not the believers in the Messiah, not the Israelites, but the pagans were saying the gods have become like men. That's what pagans did. They wanted to elevate the Elohim down to their level, and that's exactly what they did. And they start calling Barnabas Zeus. So they start saying about the name, the Almighty's name, the Elohim of Israel, Yahweh, how the shortened form of his name being at the end of many Hebrew names. And like I said, the Greeks did the same thing. At the Dionysus, you find the name Zeus at the end of a lot of Greek names, including the name Iezus. Excuse me a minute. Yeah, I'm pausing. I don't want to get off the subject here, but there's been a lot of terrorist attacks in Israel recently. Like they're right by the Jaffa Gate here last week, I believe it was. There was 3 of them right there. A couple of Jews got killed, and of course the terrorists got killed. So I'm sitting in a park right now, and there's a lot of Arabs that happen to walk by here once in a while. So there's a couple coming my way here now. Not that I believe they're going to bother me, but if something happened, I wanted to be aware of it. So like I said, the Almighty's name is at the end of many Hebrew names, and the same is true in the Greek language. Iezus. You hear the name of Zeus in there. Now it's spelled in the Greek S-I-E-S-O-U-S. S-O-U-S. It's not spelled the same as Zeus, the way we would spell the name of the pagan god. But like I said, names are transliterated. They're not translated. So it doesn't matter how it's spelled. What matters is the pronunciation remains as close to the original as you can keep it. And the name Zeus doesn't get any more original than that in the name Iezus. Am I saying that the Almighty was given the name after the pagan god Zeus? I'm not saying he was, and I'm not saying he wasn't. And I'll explain why people say that he wasn't in a moment. So the Messiah was not called by a Greek name, Iezus. He was called by a Hebrew name. Let me comment on that now about why he wasn't. In the Septuagint, I mentioned the name Iezus, and I'm building the case that it could be talking about the pagan Elohim Zeus, ascribed it in the word Iezus there and given to the Messiah, just like the pagans did in Acts 14 with Barnabas. They start calling him Zeus. So I'm making the case that that's possible with the Almighty's name, with the Messiah's name. I'm not saying that's a fact, but I'm saying it sure is coincidental in my opinion. Okay, let me back up now and give the opposing view to what I just said. In the Septuagint, which was written around 250, it began to be written, the Torah scrolls were translated around 285 BC, before the Messiah. 285 years before the Messiah, the Hebrew Torah was translated into Greek, and it was called the Septuagint. So that's long before the Messiah ever walked the earth. And in that book, the name Yahoshua, the son of Nun, Moses' general, who the book is named after, of course, in the Bible. After the Deuteronomy, we have the book of Joshua. But so the name in the Greek, in the Septuagint, 285 years before the Messiah, is the name Zeus. It's the same name they ascribed to the Messiah. Of course, it's the same name in the Hebrew also. Yahoshua, the son of Nun, Yahoshua, the HaMashiach. So it's the same name, Zeus. So was it a conspiracy? 285 years before the Messiah, did they put the name Zeus in there, describing Yahoshua, the general, Moses' general? Well, some people would say no. I'm saying it's a possibility. Because the Greeks wanted to have their God inscribed in the books. And they got it in there. I believe they got it in there with the name Zeus. By calling Yahoshua, the son of Nun, Zeus, they got the name Zeus in there. It's not a solid case that I'm making here, obviously, but I see the name Zeus in the name Zeus. I would never call the Messiah by the name Zeus. I'm not Greek, and I don't believe a Greek would either. Like I said, if I was a Greek-speaking person, what would I call him? I'd call him by his name, Yahoshua. Yahoshua. They could say Yahoshua. Every language on the planet can say Yahoshua. They don't have to change his name, and it should never be changed, of course. So anyway, in the Septuagint, written 285 years before the Messiah, the name Yahoshua is supposedly transliterated in there as Zeus. So that's the flip side of that coin. The pagan name Zeus is at the end of Zeus. I'm making the case, just like in Acts 14, how the pagans did by calling Barnabas Zeus, that possibly the Zeus could be the pagan name of their god Zeus, attached to the IE there, IE, which some people think means the healing Zeus. Nobody really knows for sure what the IE Zeus means, if it was translated. But I think we do see the word Zeus there. So again, I would never call him by the name Zeus. I'm sure you wouldn't either if you were an English-speaking person. I imagine the only people we might have to be concerned about are Greek-speaking people calling him Zeus. And I don't think that's possible either, because like I said, if Paul was talking to a Greek-speaking person, would he change the Messiah's name to Zeus instead of Yahoshua? Of course not. I mentioned that the Messiah spoke Hebrew. Turn, if you would, to Acts chapter 26. Acts chapter 26. I just want to comment on a few passages there just to make it clear that the Messiah absolutely did speak Hebrew. He may have known the Greek language, I'm not sure, but we know for sure that he spoke Hebrew. The people around him spoke Hebrew. The Apostle Paul had the gift of tongues more than any man, so I'm sure he spoke Hebrew, Greek, Latin. Sounds like he knew Lycaonian language that we read there in Acts 14 as well. So he had the gift of tongues more than any man, Paul says. But Paul spoke Hebrew. The Israelites at that time spoke Hebrew. The Messiah spoke Hebrew. And I know most of us believe that, but there are some people I've met in the past who don't. They still argue that everybody was speaking Greek back then. And like I said, in the beginning of the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, which I think is like $12, it's been 20-some years since I've looked at it, but in the beginning of that Bible, it says in there, the Dead Sea Scrolls, again, put to rest forever the argument that Greek was a predominant language in Israel at that time. It absolutely was not. It was Hebrew. That's in the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. So in Acts chapter 26 and verse 14 I'm going to read. Like I said, I'm just going to read through a couple of these real fast just to give you so that you realize that Hebrew was a predominant language at that time. In verse 14, Paul's talking here. He's giving his testimony about the road to Damascus and meeting the Messiah. And he says, and when he had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew dialect, Hebrew, not Greek, Hebrew dialect, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, who art thou, master? And the master said, I am Yahoshua, whom you are persecuting. See, in the translation, it has the name Jesus. Hopefully we understand that's not possible, because there was no letter J at that time, and in the Greek, that name would be Zeus. Did the Messiah say, I am Zeus, that you are persecuting? Of course not. He said, I'm Yahshua. I'm Yahshua, the one that you're persecuting. His name in Hebrew and English and Russian and French and any other language is Yahshua. He said to Saul, Saul, I'm Yahshua. I'm not Jesus. I don't know, it just seems so clear to me. It seems like it's, I don't understand why. So let's look at another one here. Acts chapter 21, verse 40. Acts chapter 21. I'm going to talk in a moment about how his name was prophesied. Acts 21 and verse 40. This is Paul giving us a testimony before the Jews who wanted to kill him. This is Acts 20:21. If you read back earlier here, there's tens of thousands of Jews that thought Paul was talking against the Torah, against the law, telling people they don't have to obey it. In verse 24 of Acts 21:24, James says, show them, brother Paul, there's no truth to this, that they're misunderstanding you, that we do have to walk orderly, keeping the law. That you, Paul, walk orderly, keeping the law. That's what's happening here. But these Jews wanted to kill him because they thought that he was talking against obeying the Heavenly Father's law, just as Christianity does today. Paul says in Romans chapter 2, verses 11, 12, and 13 there. You might want to take a look at it. Paul makes it extremely clear. He says the hearers of the law will not be justified before Yahweh, but the doers of the law will be justified. Romans 2:13. But in Acts 21, verse 40 here, let me read this. It says, when he had given permission, Paul, standing on the stairs, motioned to the people with his hand, and when there was a great hush, he spoke to them in the Hebrew dialect, saying, and then he goes on, starts talking, 22 verse 1. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense, and I now offer to you. And when they heard he was addressing him in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet, and then he went on to give his testimony there. But so when they thought Paul was a Greek, they thought he was some pagan, some heathen that was distorting the faith, the Hebrew faith. So when they heard him speaking in Hebrew, they was like, whoa, this guy's not a Greek, he's one of us. He's one of us. He was speaking in the Hebrew dialect. He wasn't speaking Greek to him, he was speaking Hebrew to him. And when they seen that, you notice they all stopped. They all stopped. Because Hebrew was the language of the Jews at that time. Let me comment on a couple more passages here, and then we'll move on to the prophecy of why the Messiah is prophesied. In Mark chapter 5, verse 41. Mark chapter 5, verse 41. I'm not going to turn there. You can look there. But it's the Messiah when he raised the little girl from the dead. He says, Talitha kum, Talitha kum. It's Hebrew. It means arise, little girl, get up, arise, get up. In Mark chapter 15, verse 34, a very popular passage we're all familiar with. But when the Messiah was hanging on the stake, what was his last words? Eloi, 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 lama sabachthani. That's Hebrew. He wasn't speaking Greek or French. He was speaking Hebrew. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means my El, why have you forsaken me? He's speaking Hebrew. And of course, there's other examples I can give, but hopefully the point's been made. The Messiah spoke Hebrew. Paul spoke Hebrew. The Jews at that time spoke Hebrew. They weren't speaking Greek. So even if the name in the Greek was Jesus, which is not, I don't believe is possible, they would have still been calling him by the Hebrew name Yahshua. And Yahshua, that's English, by the way. I'm saying that. I'm an English speaker, Yahshua. If I was to talk to somebody here in Israel, a Hebrew-speaking person said Yahshua, they would know exactly what I was talking about. They would know I was talking about my Messiah, but they would recognize the name. The name Yahshua, or more properly I would think is Yahoshua, is on street signs all over Israel. Streets are named Yahoshua, Yahoshua Street. A lot of people, I know a couple people that are called Yahoshua. Yahoshua is a very popular name in Israel. And you say it the same way in English, and you would say it the same way in any other language. Yahoshua, Yahshua, Yahoshua. Again, I believe the O there is more proper. I don't mean to sound confusing by saying that, but we say it as best as we know how. And the name in Hebrew of Yahshua, the son of Nun, would be Yahoshua, or Yahshua, I believe, in my opinion, would be acceptable as well, of course. But anyway, the point I want to make is that they spoke Hebrew, not Greek. Okay, I talked about the Messiah's name being prophesied. Turn to Zechariah chapter 3. Zechariah chapter 3. You're going to have to follow along here. It's not confusing, but it's going to sound a little bit confusing. And I'm not the best at explaining things here, so I hope you're following along with me. In Zechariah chapter 3, and I'm going to begin in verse 1. Let me stop here a moment and set the stage a little bit for this. This is Zechariah. Zechariah was in Babylon for 70 years. They were, well, however long, he might have been born in Babylon. But when Judah, the two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, they got taken into captivity into Babylon around 586 BC. 586 BC. And they were there for 70 years. And after 70 years, they were given permission to come out of Babylon and rebuild the temple. You know, Cyrus, of course, who was prophesied in Isaiah, he gave them permission to come back and build the temple. And then Artaxerxes, I believe, is the one that gave Nehemiah, permission to come back and build the walls around the city. So anyway, they came out of Babylon after 70 years. And Zechariah is one of the prophets that came out of Babylon. Zechariah, Haggai, Ezra, Nehemiah, these people were all coming out of Babylon back to the Jerusalem to rebuild the city. So that's what's happening here. So Zechariah is here prophesying now. He was a prophet that came out from Babylon along with, like I said, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Haggai, and of course many others. I'm trying to think of some other names. But they all came out of Babylon after 70 years. And they were rebuilding Jerusalem. And Zechariah was a prophet. Now let me say this. There was a high priest that came out of Babylon as well and came to Jerusalem. And his name was Yahushua, or better translated Yahoshua. His name was Yahoshua. And his father's name was Jehozadak. Jehozadak. Remember what I talked about names being translated and transliterated? The name Jehozadak is a name, but it's transliterated. If you translated it, what it means is Yahweh our righteousness. Yahweh our righteousness. That's what the word Jehozadak means in Hebrew. Yahweh our righteousness. Like the name Yahshua, Yahoshua, it means Yah is salvation. Transliterated, it's the name Yahoshua. Translated, it means Yah is salvation. The name Jehozadak, transliterated, it's Jehozadak. You bring it into the language, keeping the pronunciation as close to the original as possible. Which isn't that amazing? We're doing a fine job doing that, sitting here in English 3,000 years later, speaking English, saying the name the way it was spoken back then. It's not a hard thing to do, because our languages, our alphabets line up pretty much with the Hebrew alphabet, so we're able to say the name almost exactly as it was said back then. So anyway, the name Jehozadak means Yahweh our righteousness. Keep that in mind. But there was a high priest at this time, and his name was Yahoshua, and he did have a father named Jehozadak. I'm going to suggest to you as we're reading this, and I believe it'll become evident as I go through here, that what I'm saying is true. This is prophetically talking about the Messiah, whose name is going to be, will be when he appears on the earth, 400 years later, 490 years later actually, from the time this was written. That's a prophecy in Daniel, about 770s, 490 years. Talks about the Messiah, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, 26, 27, 28. So anyway, this is a prophecy talking about the Messiah, whose name is Yahoshua. And his father is, instead of transliterating the name Jehozadak, his father is Yahweh our righteousness. So instead of Yahshua, the son of Jehozadak, it's Yahshua, the son of Yahweh our righteousness. Prophetically talking about the Messiah. That's not a stretch. I can see somebody shaking their head saying, oh, come on, but I think it's going to become evident that what I'm saying is absolutely true. So let's read on to keep that in mind, and let's read on through here. Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1. Chapter 3, verse 1. And he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of Yahweh, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. And Yahweh said to Satan, Yahweh rebuke you, Satan. Indeed, Yahweh who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this the brand plucked from the fire? He's asking a question about this Joshua. And he's saying it to the adversary, Satan. In verse 3, Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and standing before the angel. And he spoke and said to those who were standing before him, saying, Remove the filthy garments from him, from Joshua. And again he said, See, I have taken away your iniquity from you, and I will clothe you in festal robes. So the filthy garments were representative of iniquity, of sin. And he says, I've taken away your iniquity, and I've clothed you with festal robes. In verse 5. And then I said, Let them put a clean turban on his head. So they put a clean turban on his head and clothed him with garments, and the angel of Yahweh was standing by. And the angel of Yahweh also admonished Joshua, saying, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, If you will walk in my ways, and if you will perform my service, then you will also govern my house and also have charge of my courts. Govern my house and have charge of my courts. And I will grant you free access among those who are standing here. So he's saying to this Yahushua, if you will walk in his ways and perform his service, he's going to put him in charge of governing his house and in charge of his courts. And I'm saying this is not talking about the Yahushua that was alive at that time. It's prophetically talking about the Messiah, who was clothed in the filthy garments of the sins of Israel. Isaiah chapter 53, the suffering servant of Isaiah 53 who took upon himself the sins of Israel. That's who this is talking about. Those are the filthy garments that the angel's talking about. It's the iniquity of the house of Israel. Let me keep reading here. In verse 8, it says, and now listen, Yahushua the high priest, you and your friends who are sitting in front of you, indeed, they are men who are a symbol. I'm going to come back to that symbol point. For behold, I am going to bring in my servant, the branch. So he's saying to Yahushua, I'm going to bring in my servant. And he's looking at Yahushua, the branch. The branch in Judaism is always recognized as being the Messiah. It's the Mashiach. In the Hebrew, it's the word Samech, and it's talking about the Messiah. There's a number of times you can go back and read it. I'm not going to take the time now, but Isaiah 11, verses 1 to 5 there. Isaiah chapter 11 is a prophetic passage, just about the whole chapter. But verses 1 to 5 there, it talks about the Messiah. It's clearly, nobody would dispute that it's talking about the Messiah. So it says, wears a belt of righteousness, loins, he's going to judge with an iron rod, he's going to rule upon the earth. Then it goes on to say in verse 6, the lamb and the lion are going to lay down together, the child's going to play over the hole of an asp and not be harmed in all my holy mountains, says Yahweh. So it's clearly talking about the Messiah. Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 5. In Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 15, is another one. Jeremiah 33, 15, where it talks about the branch. And it's clearly talking about the Messiah. Isaiah chapter 4, verse 2. There's another one where it mentions the branch, and it's clearly talking about the Messiah. The branch is always talking about the Messiah, unless it happens to be in the context of talking about a tree or something. But the branch in the Tanakh is the Messiah, and it's the Messiah here that is being talked about here. It says, behold, I'm going to bring in my servant, the branch, the Messiah. I probably said more about that than I had to, huh? Because we all recognize that the branch is the Messiah. It says in verse 9, for behold, the stone which I have set before Yahushua, on one stone are 7 eyes, and behold, I will engrave on you an inscription. I will engrave an inscription on it, declares Yahweh of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of the land in 1 day. He's going to remove the iniquity of that land in 1 day. Did that happen? Yes, it happened. Let me read verse 10 and I'll comment on how that happened and when it happened. In verse 10, and in that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, every one of you will invite his neighbor to sit under his vine and under his fig tree. I want to suggest that he says he's going to remove the iniquity of the land in 1 day. Now, I mentioned Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. I don't want to take the time to read it, except to make sure that I'm quoting you the right passage here. Daniel chapter 9, but it's talking about the Messiah. It's talking about how he's going to be cut off after so many years. It talks about 7 times 70, which is 490 years from the decree to go rebuild this temple to the time of the Messiah, which figures out precisely to when the Messiah was going to come on the earth. And in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it's a good thing I looked. It's verse 24, not 27. It says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy places, and this is what's going to happen after the 70 weeks. That's 7 times 70. That's talking about the time when the Messiah was going to appear on the earth. There's more I can say about that, but let me move on here. To finish transgression, to make an end to sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up a vision and prophesy, and to anoint the most holy. To anoint the most holy. Your Bible might have added something after the word holy, but it should be in italicized, because what it literally says in the Hebrew, it says to anoint the most holy one. The word in the Hebrew is the most holy one. And so anyway, what's going to happen here, he's going to bring in everlasting righteousness, he's going to put an end to sin, he's going to make an atonement for iniquity. Did these things happen when the Messiah died? Absolutely they did. In the lives of those that surrendered their life to him. For instance, my life. When the Messiah died, and the Almighty got a hold of my life, iniquity, I don't practice sin anymore. Let me be careful on how I say this because some people misunderstand me. We all stumble in sin. That's a fact. It's a sad truth, but it's true. We all stumble at times, but we should never practice sin. I stopped practicing sin when the Almighty got a hold of my life and I recognized that the Messiah had died for my sins. And I joined myself to Israel at that time. There's a lot more I want to say about that, but it's for Israel that the Messiah died. And we have to join ourselves to Israel in order to acquire that atoning sacrifice. That's another talk. But in Romans chapter 9, verses 1 to 4, let me just quote a few verses here since I commented on that. I don't want to leave people wondering what I'm saying. In Romans chapter 9, verses 1 to 4, Paul makes it very clear. He says, to Israel, according to the flesh, belongs all these things. Romans 9, verse 4. The covenants, the giving of the law, the adoption of sons, the promises, the Messiah belong to Israel according to the flesh. So if a Gentile wants access to those covenants and those promises and the adoption of sons, what do they have to do? Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. They have to join themselves to the commonwealth of Israel. Romans chapter 11, they're grafted into the natural olive tree. Romans 11, around verse 16 on down there. The Gentiles grafted into the natural olive tree. The natural olive tree, of course, being Israel. The new covenant and the so-called old covenant were made with Israel, not the world. Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34, and Hebrews chapter 8, verses 7 to 13. The new covenant is made with Israel, not the world. If the world wants to join that covenant, they're welcome to do so, but it wasn't made with them. They have to become part of Israel. I'd like to make a tape on that. Who is Israel? There's so much confusion. There's actually Christian groups out there that think they've replaced Israel, which is so incredibly bizarre. I mean, there's so many, I don't know if you happen to be one of them listening right now, but there's so many passages in the Bible where Yahweh says he's going to call back his people from the four corners of the earth. Is he calling the Christian back? The Christian was never part of his people. A Christian can become part of his people, of course. They surely did not supplant Israel. Israel will always be the Almighty's people. I was talking to a brother last night about this, and we were saying how the Almighty made a covenant with the forefathers, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He said, I'll never go back in that covenant. He's never going to forsake Israel. He said they're a hard, stiff-necked people, but he's never going to go back in the promises that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's not possible. He'll never forsake his people, Israel. I didn't mean to get off on that tangent. But Jeremiah 7, the Messiah put an end to sin in one day. When he died, he put an end, I'm looking at Daniel chapter 9 here, verse 24. So the Messiah put an end to sin. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here. When he died. In the lives of those that chose to surrender their life to him, he tells us 6 times, 6 times in the 4 Gospels, that we have to, unless you lose your life, you'll never see life. So in order to be salvation is not bowing your head and saying a sinner's prayer. It's losing your life and allowing the Messiah to live his life in you. Paul says in Galatians 2:20, I no longer live, but Messiah lives in me. It's I no longer live, but Messiah lives in me. I don't do what I want to do. I don't say what I want to say. I say what I have to say, what the Messiah would say living in me. I've surrendered my life to him and I become a slave to righteousness. Romans chapter 6, Paul says we should be slaves to righteousness, no longer slaves to sin. All the glory to Yahweh, by his grace, I don't give in to the desires of the flesh. I'm a slave to righteousness. When given the option of good and bad, I choose the good, because the Messiah is living in me. I have no other choice. I've taken upon the yoke of the Messiah in Matthew 11. Take upon me my yoke. The Messiah is walking next to you in the yoke. You're not going to be walking off doing things that you shouldn't be doing. If you are doing things you shouldn't be doing, Paul says examine yourself and see that the Messiah be in you. If you're doing things you shouldn't be doing, then obviously the Messiah is not in you. But anyway, I didn't want to get off on that. But the Messiah put an end to iniquity in one day when he died on a stake in the lives of those that surrendered their lives to him. Those that didn't surrender their lives to him, they're still much in their iniquity. Their iniquity has never been taken away. Zechariah chapter 3. Back to Zechariah chapter 3. Zechariah chapter 3. I read verse 9 there. It says, "Behold the stone which I have set before Yahushua. On one stone are 7 eyes, and behold, I will engrave an inscription, declares Yahweh of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of the land in one day." Turn to Zechariah chapter 6. If that wasn't clear about that being the Messiah, prophetically talking about the Messiah, I believe this will be. Zechariah chapter 6. You could read verses 1 through 9 there, but I'm going to pick it up, 1 through 10, but I'm going to pick up in verse 9. It says, "The word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Take an offering from the exiles, Hildiah, Tobiah, Jedaiah, and go in the same day and enter the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah, where they have arrived from Babylon." So he says, take an offering from the exiles, from those arriving from Babylon. That's these men that were mentioned back in chapter 3, that it says they're a symbol. Remember I commented, I said I want to comment on how they're a symbol. I believe they're a symbol of those coming out of Babylon. These men that are mentioned here, they're a symbol of those coming out of Babylon. That's what it's saying here in verse 10, I believe. That's my understanding, my opinion. In verse 11, it says, "Take silver and gold, make an ornate crown, set it on the head of Yahushua, the son of Yahweh, our righteousness." This cannot possibly be talking about the Yahushua, the son of Jehozadak, who lived at that time. He wasn't a king, he was a priest. And in Israel, there's no such thing as a king and a priest. That's called the order of Melchizedek, which I'm going to comment on in a moment. But Yahushua was not the king. Israel didn't have a king. When they came out of Babylon, they rebuilt the city of Jerusalem again, the old city here. They never had a king after that. Herod, if we want to call Herod a king, Herod the Great, he was appointed by Rome, of course. He wasn't appointed by the Almighty, but he was appointed by Rome. Herod the Great around 44 BC, before the time of Messiah, that would have been the first king that Israel had. So in other words, like I said, Israel didn't have a king. He wasn't put there by Yahweh. He was put there by the Roman government. So when it says, "Put a crown upon the head of this Yahushua, the son of Jehozadak, or son of Yahweh, our righteousness," it's not possible that it's talking about the Yahushua that existed at that time, because he was not a king. Israel never had a king again after that. This Yahushua that existed then was Yahushua the high priest, but he was not a king. So it says in verse 11 again, "Take a silver and gold, make an ornate crown, set it on the head of Yahushua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and say to him, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, Behold a man who is branch, for he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple." So they put the crown upon Yahushua the high priest, and he said, "Behold the branch." In other words, behold the Mashiach. This is a Mashiach. He's going to branch out from where he is, and he will rebuild the temple. The Messiah is going to rebuild the temple. Again, there's, I don't want to get off on a tangent about the temple being built, but I think that's pretty clear that it's going to be Yahushua, Yahoshua, the son of Yahweh, our righteousness. He will rebuild the temple. Let me continue reading here. Verse 13, "Yes, it is he that will rebuild the temple of Yahweh, and he will bear the honor and sit and rule on his throne. Thus he will be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace will be between the two offices." The two offices are king and a priest. He's going to be a priest upon his throne. He's going to be a king and a priest. And like I said, that doesn't happen in Israel. You're either a priest, a king from the tribe of Judah, you're a priest from the tribe of Levi. You're not a king and a priest. The only time that's ever mentioned in the Bible is Melchizedek. Melchizedek. You can go back and check out these passages. I know a lot of us are familiar with it, but in Genesis chapter 14, you can read about Melchizedek. It says he was the king of Salem. And after Abraham got back from the battle of the kings, he met Melchizedek. And Melchizedek means king of righteousness. That's what the word translated means, king of righteousness. But he was a king and a priest. So this Mashiach here, this Yahushua, the son of Yahweh, our righteousness, he's going to be a king and a priest. Hebrews chapter 5. Again, I'm not going to take the right. I think I've taken too much time already. So Hebrews chapter 5, Hebrews chapter 6, Hebrews chapter 11. It talks about the Messiah. It's talking about Melchizedek. Those passages are talking about Melchizedek. In Hebrews chapter 11, it's talking about Melchizedek, and it's talking about the Messiah. He's going to be a priest in the order of Melchizedek. That's Hebrews chapter 7. In Psalm chapter 110, verse 1, let's turn there if you would. This is a very prominent passage. Psalm 110, verses 1 to 4, I'm going to read. There's a little story I'd like to tell you about this. I hope you don't mind. You can fast forward the tape if you do mind. I'm going to tell the story here. But Proverbs chapter 110, Proverbs 110, verses 1 to 4. I'm sorry, Psalm 100. I mean Proverbs. Psalm 110. And verses 1 to 4. I'm going to read that. Before I read that, let me tell you a little story. I was sitting here in Jerusalem one day about maybe 6 years ago, actually right down the road here, maybe a 20-minute walk from where I'm sitting. I called a very prominent Karaite up in Israel here. If I said his name, most of you know who I'm talking about without saying his name. But a very prominent Karaite in Israel. The Karaites believe in the oral Torah. They don't believe in they believe in the written Torah, not the oral Torah. So I called this Karaite up and I asked him if we can get together. I said, there's things I'd like to ask him about, concerning his take on certain commandments in the written Torah. So I told him at the time, I said, I believe in the Messiah, but I said, I'm not coming there to talk to you about the Messiah, I'm coming to talk to you about the Torah. If you want to talk about the Messiah, I said, I'd be more than happy to do that. I would love to do that. But I don't expect to convert you. I don't think that's going to happen. But if you want to talk about it, we can. So we got together right here at a place called it's a cafe down here in the south side of Jerusalem in the German colony. And he brought his friend with him, Adam. He had his friend Adam. There was Adam, this fella here, and myself. And I tell you, this Karaite that I'm talking about has a reputation for talking Christians out of their faith. I'm tempted to tell you his name. But he has a reputation for talking Christians out of his faith. And he can do it. Because when he talks a Christian out of their faith, what he tells them is, he proves to them from the scriptures, there's no such thing as a Trinity. Christmas is not the birth of the Messiah. He didn't raise from the dead on Easter. Nobody rose from the dead on Easter. That's a pagan holiday, of course. The Torah was never done away with. So when he shows a Christian those things, and a Christian opens his Bible and he sees that that's true, it just blows away their faith. And like, wow, I've been deceived all these years. Instead of looking for the truth, they just give up on everything. And I know people personally that he's done that to, this individual that I'm talking about. So we sat there, and in a few minutes into the conversation, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we talked for over 4 hours. 4 hours. About 15 minutes into the conversation, he says, so you believe in Jesus? I said, I have nothing to do with Jesus. Now let me explain this. Don't get upset at me listening. I said, I have nothing to do with Jesus. I said, I believe in Yahoshua, the HaMashiach, from the Tanakh. I don't believe in a triune God. I don't believe Christmas and Easter. I don't believe the Torah has been done away with. My Mashiach, my Messiah, says that I have to walk even as he walked in obedience to his Heavenly Father's commands. And I quoted 1 John chapter 2, verse 6, 1 John chapter 4, verse 17. The number of times that we have to walk as the Messiah walked. He's our example. I like to say, if he did it, I do it. If he didn't do it, I don't do it. So I'm telling this fellow that. I said, no, my Messiah says I have to walk in obedience to the Torah. My Messiah, Jesus, doesn't say the Torah has been done away with. He says I have to walk in obedience to the Torah. So anyway, I says, I can prove that to you from the Tanakh. I can prove my Mashiach from the Tanakh. I don't need the so-called New Testament. The apostles didn't use the New Testament. When they went around preaching, did Paul pull out his letter in Acts 17:11 when he went to the Bereans there? And it says that he got up and he opened up the scriptures and he preached to them the Messiah. And it says the Bereans were more noble than all others because they looked into the things that Paul said to see if they were true. I like to say jokingly, did Paul pull out a letter to Timothy and say, oh, by the way, this is the New Testament here? No, I have I think I have a video on that, on the covenants, under the covenants, the New Covenant and Old Covenant. You might want to take a look at that. But the books from Matthew to Revelation are not the New Covenant. Paul did not go around, nor did any apostle, trying to promote them as a New Covenant. The first time their letters were called the New Covenant, or the New Testament, were around the year 200 AD by a man named Tertullian. You can check it out on Google. Google Tertullian. Tertullian, I believe, Tertullian. So anyway, this fellow's sitting here, and myself, this Karaite, and we're sitting here, and I said I could prove it from the Tanakh, so he kind of very smiles and says, go for it. So we went through all these passages, and I'm telling him before he started, I said, now I'm going to ask you who these prophetic passages are talking about. And don't mention my Messiah. Don't say Yahoshua. You tell me who you think they're talking about. I'm telling you they're all talking about, and they can only be talking about my Mashiach, Yahoshua. But you tell me who you think they're talking about. So we sat there, like I said, almost 4 hours, and I'm sliding the Bible back and forth. I brought my Bible with me. Psalm 22, Psalm 18, Psalm 118. And we're going through all these prophetic passages. And it culminated down at Isaiah 53. We got to Isaiah 53, and I read through that. And this fella says, I said, who is that talking about? Who is going to die for the sins of Israel? He didn't say, as many Orthodox say today, that's talking about the nation of Israel, which is totally impossible. And it's extremely easy to show. I mean, you can prove it to yourself by reading through it and inserting Israel there in the context where it says, he died for the sins of my people. Who's that? Israel died for the sins of my people. Who's my people? The people that believe it's talking about Israel say it's talking about the pagan nations. They're called Yahweh's people. Like I said, you could prove it to yourself that's not possible if it's talking about Israel by just reading through there, inserting Israel in the context. So anyway, this fella didn't bring up the idea that it's talking about Israel. He recognized that it was talking about an individual. So he said, well, that could be talking about a lot of people. Some people feel it's talking about Jeremiah, competing with the church bells over here. Some people feel it can be talking about Jeremiah, and I said, well, that's not possible. Because Jeremiah, a number of times, Jeremiah said he was praying to the Almighty that he would bring vengeance on those that were persecuting him. He prayed 4 or 5 times. He said, bring vengeance on these people for what they're doing to me. I said, he was not like a lamb led to the slaughter that did not open his mouth. He was opening his mouth. I said, I don't think he would fit the context there in Isaiah 53. So he says, well, some people feel Zabbatai Zevi, who was a 16th century rabbi who most of Israel at the time felt was the Messiah. And they felt that passage, that chapter was talking about him. And I said to this individual, I said, Zabbatai Zevi converted to Islam. He became a Muslim before he died. I said, why in the world would you mention his name? And this fellow started laughing, smiling like, he goes, okay, well, he goes, if that's your Messiah, he says, where's he at now? He goes, if you're saying that's Yahoshua, the one you believe to be the Messiah, he says, where's he at now? And I tell you, I must have lit up like a light bulb. I turned to Psalm 110, which is where we're at now, and I asked him to read this. And I'm telling you, he had enough time to read these 4 passages 4 or 5 times. He was not looking up from the book because he didn't have an answer. So he's asking me where the Messiah is in Isaiah 53. In Isaiah 53, it says that he died. He clearly died. His grave was with a rich man in his death. Isaiah 53, verse 10. In verse 12 and 13 there, it goes on to say that he resurrected. It doesn't say specifically it resurrected, but he said he's going to share the booty, the spoils. He's going to see a seed. So obviously he died and he's coming back from the dead because he's going to see a seed, that's the remnant, and he's going to share in the spoils. So he's coming back from the dead. So I'm telling this fella that. And he says, well, then where's he at now? If he died and he's coming back from the dead, then where's he at now? And that's when I turned to Psalm 110. And I tell you, like I said, he had enough time to read it 4 or 5 times. He was not looking up off the page. And I'm sitting there, and as he's looking at it, I'm saying, who is that talking about? Is it talking about a rabbi, a sage, a priest, a king? Who's sitting at the right hand of the Father right now? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's read it here, and then I'll tell you what I said to this individual. Psalm 110, verse 1. It says, Yahweh said to my master, you see the L-O-R-D capitals there? That's the word, that's the Almighty's name, Yahweh. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And Yahweh will stretch forth your strong scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will volunteer freely in the day of your power. In holy array from the womb of dawn, your youth are to you as the dew. In verse 4, and Yahweh has sworn he will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. According to the order of Melchizedek. This one that is sitting at the right hand of the Father right now is a priest, is going to be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. He's waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. So anyway, this fellow, this Karaite Jew, we're reading this, and I said, who's sitting at the right hand of the Father? Who's sitting there right now? And like I said, he wasn't answering. And finally, when I kept prodding him a little bit, saying, is it a king, a priest, a rabbi, a sage? Who's sitting at the right hand of the Father? And he wouldn't answer. This Karaite wouldn't answer. I said, it's the one that died in Isaiah 53. I said, he died, he's sitting at the right hand of the Father, and he's coming back. He's going to be a king after the order, a priest after the order of Melchizedek. The order of Melchizedek, like I mentioned in Genesis 14, Melchizedek is a king and a priest. That doesn't happen in Israel. Melchizedek is the only person mentioned in the Bible that's been a king and a priest. And this Mashiach that's talked about in Psalm 110, it's talked about in Zechariah chapter 6, the Yahshua, the son of Yehoshua, son of Yahweh, our righteousness. He's going to be a king and a priest. That is literally after the order of Melchizedek. It's talking about the Mashiach. I feel like I went on more than I wanted to here. There's more I'd like to say about the name. Of course, I can go on for another hour talking about the name. But anyway, the bottom line is the Messiah's name is prophesied in Zechariah chapter 3 and 6. His name is Yahoshua, or Yahshua, the son of Yahweh, our righteousness. That's talking about the Messiah. He's going to sit on his throne ruling after the order of Melchizedek. He's going to be a king and a priest. He's going to sit on the throne between the two offices, the office of a king and a priest. Zechariah 6. The name Jesus, again, let me comment on that. Turn to Revelation 3 if you would. One more passage I want to look at, and then I'll be done here. One more passage. Revelation chapter 3. And I'm going to read verse 8. It's Messiah talking to the assembly at Philadelphia. He says, "Behold, I cause those of the synagogue," verse 8, "I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door which no one can shut, because you have little power and have kept my word and have not denied my name." Well, I wanted to comment on that. They have not denied his name. Was his name Jesus? The name Jesus, it's not a question, because the name Jesus did not exist at that time, anywhere in the world. Did they call him Iesus? Is that the name the Messiah was talking about? You did not deny my name, Iesus? That's not his name either. His name is Yahshua, Yahoshua. Yahoshua, Yahshua. Yahoshua, I believe, is more proper. Yahshua, most people say Yahshua. I believe Yahoshua is more proper. But did they call him Iesus? Is that the name the Messiah is talking about here? Of course not. It's silly to even say that. The name Iesus is not the name of the Messiah. The name Jesus did not exist. Are people denying his name today when they call him by a name that didn't even exist at that time? I'm sure they're not doing it willingly or knowingly, but yes, they're absolutely doing it. So now that you know the name is not Jesus, and you can verify it very, very easily for yourself, Messiah never heard that name before. His name is Yahoshua, or Yahshua, the son of Yahweh, our righteousness. That's the name Peter talked about in Acts 4:12. There's no other name given among men by which we must be saved. That's the name. It's not Iesus, and it's not Jesus. What are you going to do with the information you have today? This is what I started to say earlier. I'm always amazed that the Almighty, when he got a hold of my life, whenever he showed me a truth, I had to go with it. It didn't matter what anybody said or thought of me. I've often made the comment, I'm sure there's a lot of maybe people watching this now. I said, I don't care how ridiculous people might think I am. If he shows me I'm wrong about something today, I'm going to change today. I'll verify it, of course. I'm not going to take somebody's word for something they say. And I went to great lengths in verifying what I believe today. Great lengths. And once I was convinced that what I believe is the truth, it's the truth. And I don't care what anybody said or thought about me. That's the way we have to be, because on Judgment Day, I'm going to be all by myself. Nobody's going to be standing with me. And I'm going to have to give an account for my life and for the truth that the Almighty showed me. And did I walk in the truth that he showed me? Messiah says in John chapter 8, verse 32, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." The truth is, Messiah never heard the name Jesus. Are you going to embrace that truth today? I almost want to ask you why you wouldn't. But the fact is, most people are not going to. As hard as that is for me to comprehend, most people are not going to. I think about this a lot, and I think the reason they won't is, I can think of three reasons. Friends, family, and fellowship. If you go to your fellowship today and you tell your minister, who probably never heard what we talked about here today, and when you explain it to him, and what we talked about today, he's not going to want to change. I've known two ministers in the last 35 years, whatever it's been, that actually have changed when they seen that they were wrong. And guess what happened to them? They both lost their fellowships, of course. They both lost their churches. The one fellow started preaching out of his basement with a few people that came from his congregation, and he started preaching out of his basement. The other one got thrown out of his church. I'm not sure what happened to him. I went back to talk to him at a later date, and they told me he's no longer there. I don't know what happened to him. Well, three people. I could think of another group in Oklahoma that came to see that the Sabbath day wasn't on Sunday. It was the seventh day of the week. And when they changed and started observing it on the seventh day of the week, half of the congregation left. Then they came to see that the feast days were never done away with. More of the congregation left. They came to see that the Torah had to be obeyed. Now they were down to 4 families from the last I've seen a number of years ago. So there's a price to pay. So like I said, if you embrace the name and say the name's not Jesus and you're going to start calling him by the name he was given at birth, Yahoshua, a lot's going to change in your life. Your fellowship may not fellowship with you anymore. Your friends may not talk to you anymore. That's happened a number of times in my life. When I came to see things that weren't true, I said, this is the truth. Let's talk about it. Most people don't want to talk about it. So anyway, I could think of those 3 things: friends, family, and fellowship. That'll keep people from embracing what you've heard today as being the truth. But it's up to you. I believe the Messiah is coming back very shortly. Very, very shortly. I'm almost tempted not to say anything because you're going to think I'm a little bit crazy, but I think it's very short. I think what's going on in Russia right now, in Syria, on the border right here in Syria, with Russia and China and Iran, everybody on Israel's border, the UN is passing all kind of resolutions against Israel, saying Jerusalem doesn't belong to Israel, telling Israel they have to give back the Golan Heights to Syria. Those things are not going to happen with all the terrorist attacks that are going on right now. Most Jews that I've talked to, the most prominent rabbi in Israel, who never gives way to talking about the Mashiach, the Messiah, he made a comment. I have the video, and I'll put the video on the internet, on the website. He made the comments, a rabbi came from Lithuania to Israel to be blessed by the head rabbi in Israel before he went to America. The head rabbi in Israel, whom I have a hard time, Kaminsky, something along those lines. But he told the rabbi from Lithuania, he said, do not go to America. He said, the Mashiach is coming. He may even already be here. This is what the head rabbi in Israel told the head rabbi in Lithuania. What they means by it, in his mind, he says the rabbi may be walking Israel right now. He just hasn't revealed himself. I believe everybody's going to see him when he comes back. There's no question in my mind. But what I'm saying is most Jews believe that we are living in the birth pangs of the Messiah. We are living at the time of the Messiah. I got an interesting article that somebody sent me the other day, which I'll put on the website too if I remember later on, how it was prophesied that we are in the Messianic age right now by a rabbi that lived in the 1200s, 800 years ago, 900 years ago. And all of his prophecies came true. It's pretty amazing. But anyway, I believe we're living in the last days. I tell people you don't have a whole lot of time. You don't have a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. If you don't embrace the truth as a Messiah, as the Almighty shows it to you, you're making a huge mistake. You don't have a lot of time to go. You can go a couple months, 3 months, 4 months, a year without your fellowship or your friends being upset at you. It's more important what you're going to say on Judgment Day. Why didn't you obey the truth as I revealed it to you, the Almighty's going to say. He revealed it to me, I'm revealing it to you. I pray that you do the right thing. May Yahweh bless you. May He give you the strength to do the right thing. Shabbat Shalom. Shalom. Have a good day. Shalom.